Las Vegas, December 1966. The most powerful man in entertainment just destroyed Andy Williams' reputation in front of everyone who mattered. Frank Sinatra's words cut like a knife, loud, deliberate, designed to humiliate. Andy Williams stood there, his Christmas special about to premiere, his career on the line, and Frank Sinatra laughing at him like he was nothing. The party fell silent. Someone dropped a glass. Andy turned and left without a word. But the next day, Andy did something so unexpected, so impossibly graceful, that it made Frank Sinatra cry for the first time in 20 years. December 1966 was supposed to be Andy Williams' moment. His NBC Christmas special was set to premiere in just 3 days, and early word from the network was promising. Andy had poured everything into it: original arrangements of holiday classics, carefully selected guest stars, elaborate sets designed to capture the magic of the season. This wasn't just another TV show. This was Andy's shot at proving he belonged in the upper echelon of American entertainment. But in Las Vegas, there was a hierarchy, and Frank Sinatra sat at the very top. The relationship between Andy and Frank had always been cordial but distant. They moved in different circles. Frank ran with the Rat Pack: Sammy Davis Jr., Dean Martin, Joey Bishop. They owned the Copa Room. They defined Vegas cool. They lived by their own rules. Andy, meanwhile, was building his career on television, appealing to families, creating a brand built on warmth and accessibility. They were both immensely successful, but they represented two completely different Americas. Frank was danger and rebellion. Andy was comfort and tradition. On December 12, 1966, Frank Sinatra was celebrating his birthday with a private party at the Sands Hotel. It was the kind of invitation that meant something in Hollywood. Everyone who mattered in entertainment was expected to make an appearance. Andy's name was on the list, though the invitation had come through the network rather than from Frank personally. Andy's manager had been hesitant. "You don't have to go," he'd said. "Your special premieres in 3 days. Maybe it's better to stay focused." But Andy understood the unwritten rules of show business. Frank Sinatra was royalty in Las Vegas, and declining his invitation would be interpreted as disrespect. So Andy decided to make a brief appearance, wish Frank well, and leave quietly. He had no idea what was waiting for him. When Andy walked into the Sands ballroom that night, the party was already in full swing. The room glittered with celebrities, chandeliers, and champagne. Frank was holding court near the piano, surrounded by his usual crowd. The energy was electric, that particular kind of controlled chaos that always surrounded Sinatra. Andy made his way through the crowd, shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries. He spotted Frank across the room and headed in that direction, planning to offer a quick birthday greeting and then slip out. Frank saw him coming. "Ladies and gentlemen," Frank's voice cut through the noise, amplified by the microphone he'd been using to entertain the crowd. "Look who decided to join us, Mr. Andy Williams." The room turned to look. Andy smiled politely, raising his hand in acknowledgement. "Andy," Frank continued, his tone carrying that familiar Sinatra edge, equal parts charm and challenge, "I heard your Christmas special is airing this week. Let me guess, you're gonna sing some carols, maybe wear one of those nice sweaters your audience loves so much?" People laughed. It seemed harmless enough, typical Frank needling. Andy nodded good-naturedly. "That's the plan, Frank. Someone's got to keep the wholesome folks entertained." It was the perfect response, self-deprecating but confident. The room appreciated it. But Frank wasn't finished, and this is where the tone shifted. "You know, Andy," Frank said, taking a slow sip of his Jack Daniels, "I've been thinking about what you do. You've got this whole thing figured out, don't you? Find the safest possible lane, the most inoffensive music, the broadest possible audience. It's smart. It's very smart."
Andy's smile remained, but something in his eyes changed. He sensed where this was going. Because let's be honest, Frank continued, his voice getting that particular Sinatra sharpness that made people uncomfortable. What you do isn't really about the music, is it? It's about not offending anyone. It's about being so pleasant, so agreeable, so utterly harmless that nobody could possibly object to you. The laughter in the room had stopped. People were shifting uncomfortably. "You're like a glass of warm milk, Andy," Frank said, looking directly at him now. "Nobody's going to remember what you sang tomorrow, but hey, at least you won't keep anyone up at night." The silence that followed was excruciating. Dean Martin, standing next to Frank, put a hand on his shoulder. "Frank, come on." But the damage was done. Andy Williams stood perfectly still in the middle of that glittering ballroom, surrounded by 200 of the most influential people in entertainment, and he'd just been told that his entire career was forgettable. Not in a back room, not in private, in front of everyone. His wife, Claudine, appeared at his side, her face flushed with anger. "Andy, we're leaving." For a moment, Andy didn't move. He looked at Frank Sinatra, and Frank looked back, and something passed between them that nobody else in the room could quite interpret. Then Andy did something that surprised everyone. He smiled. Not a bitter smile, not a forced smile, a genuine, almost sad smile. "Happy birthday, Frank," Andy said quietly, his voice barely carrying across the room. "I hope it's everything you wanted it to be." Then he turned and walked out of the Sands Hotel, Claudine beside him, leaving Frank Sinatra standing at the microphone in absolute silence. Someone dropped a champagne glass. The sound of it shattering seemed impossibly loud. The next morning, Frank Sinatra woke up in his suite with a headache and a feeling he couldn't quite name. Regret, maybe, or unease. The party had continued until dawn, but the energy had never quite recovered after Andy left. At noon, Frank's manager knocked on his door. "Frank, we need to talk about last night." "What about it?" Frank muttered. "The Andy Williams thing. People are talking. Some folks think you went too far." Frank waved him off. "Andy's a professional. He can handle a little ribbing." But throughout the day, Frank couldn't shake the feeling. He kept replaying the moment in his mind. Andy's face, that quiet, "Happy birthday, Frank," the way he'd just walked away with such dignity. At 3 p.m., Frank was in his dressing room at the Sands, preparing for his evening show, when his assistant brought in the afternoon mail. Among the telegrams and birthday cards was a simple envelope. No return address, just Frank's name written in neat handwriting. Inside was a single card. The front showed a simple winter scene, snow falling on a quiet street. Inside, in that same neat handwriting, were just a few lines. "Frank, congratulations on another year. You've given the world so much music, so much joy. I've always admired what you do, even if we do it differently. I hope this year brings you everything you deserve. Andy." That was it. No mention of the night before, no anger, no passive aggression, just genuine warmth. Frank read it 3 times. Then he did something his assistant had rarely seen. He put his head in his hands and sat in complete silence for nearly 10 minutes. That evening, December 13th, 1966, Frank Sinatra walked onto the stage of the Copa Room for his birthday show. The room was packed, as it always was when Sinatra performed. The energy was electric. But before the band could start the opening number, Frank held up his hand. "Hold on a second," he said into the microphone. "Before we get started tonight, I need to say something." The room went quiet. Frank took a breath. Last night, at my birthday party, I said some things to a fellow performer that I shouldn't have said. I was showing off for the crowd, and I was cruel. The man I said them to is named Andy Williams, and he didn't deserve it." You could hear a pin drop in the Copa room. "Andy Williams is a gentleman," Frank continued, his voice rougher than usual. "He's a professional. He's an artist who knows exactly who he is and what he does, and he does it with more class than I showed last night. This morning, he sent me a birthday card, just a simple, kind birthday card, after what I said to him." Frank paused, and those close to the stage could see that his eyes were glistening. "That's real strength," Frank said quietly. "Not fighting back, not holding a grudge, just grace. That's a word we don't use much around here, but that's what it was, pure grace." Frank looked down at the microphone, composing himself. "So, Andy, if you're listening, I'm sorry. Publicly, genuinely sorry. You're a class act, and I was a fool." Then Frank did something unprecedented. He dedicated his entire show that night to Andy Williams. Every song, every story, every moment was about respecting other artists, about the different ways people can touch an audience, about the importance of lifting each other up instead of tearing each other down. And in the third row, sitting quietly where Frank's assistant had left a reserved seat, was Andy Williams. Frank didn't know he was there until halfway through the show, when he spotted him during One for My Baby. For a moment, Frank stopped singing, just stopped mid-phrase, staring at Andy. Then Frank stepped off the stage, walked down to where Andy was sitting, and in front of everyone in the Copa room, he extended his hand. Andy took it. Frank pulled him into an embrace, and the two men stood there, the king of Vegas and the king of Christmas, holding on to each other while the audience erupted in applause. When they finally separated, both men had tears in their eyes. "Thank you for coming," Frank said, his voice breaking. "Thank you for the apology," Andy replied. From that night forward, Frank Sinatra and Andy Williams had a genuine friendship. Not a Hollywood friendship built on convenience and photo opportunities, a real friendship built on mutual respect and a shared understanding of what it meant to be artists in a brutal industry. Frank made a point of watching Andy's Christmas special when it aired 2 days later. He sent a telegram to NBC. "Best variety special I've seen all year. That Williams kid's got something special." When Andy's ratings came in, the special had drawn the highest numbers for any variety show that season. Frank was one of the first to call. "You showed 'em, Andy. You showed all of 'em." Over the years, they supported each other through the industry's ups and downs. When Andy was going through his painful divorce from Claudine Longet in the early 1970s, Frank called him every week. "You holding up okay, kid?" When Frank's career hit rough patches in the late 70s, Andy was there with quiet encouragement and professional advice. In a 1985 interview, Frank was asked about his biggest regret in show business. Without hesitation, he said, "There was a night in Vegas, my birthday party in '66, when I was cruel to Andy Williams in front of a room full of people. I was showing off, being the tough guy. Andy had every right to destroy me for it, but instead, he sent me a birthday card. That's the day I learned that real toughness isn't about how hard you can hit someone. It's about how much grace you have when someone hits you." Andy, for his part, rarely spoke about the incident in public, but in his autobiography, he wrote, "Frank Sinatra was complicated, brilliant, and sometimes difficult, but he was also capable of genuine growth and real humility. The night he apologized to me in front of a full Copa room was one of the most courageous things I ever saw anyone do in this business." When Frank Sinatra died in 1998, Andy Williams was one of the speakers at his memorial service. He told the story of that December night in 1966, and he ended it with these words, Frank taught me that the greatest performances don't always happen on stage. Sometimes they happen in the quiet moments, in the simple gestures, in the willingness to admit when we're wrong and to change. Frank was a giant, not just because of his voice, but because of his capacity to grow. If this story of grace, humility, and genuine friendship moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear about the power of responding to cruelty with kindness. Have you ever chosen forgiveness over revenge? How did it change the situation? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to ring that notification bell for more true stories about the moments that bring out the best in all of us.